the barriers to being a nurse entrepreneur or starting a business are much lower because of the wealth of information and people that have followed that path. So one of the most valuable lessons I learned early on in a business is it's important to surround yourself with people who are willing to help you. It takes a lot of hard work, but for me, I would not change or redo my career path. And honestly, many days I wake up and just have the opportunity to have a different day, an exciting day, and to improve the care of patients with cancer. I'm thankful for that.
You're listening to the Oncology Nursing Podcast, where ONS Voices Talk Cancer, a resource from the Oncology Nursing Society. Through conversations with subject matter experts, we examine the important issues in oncology nursing, from new treatments to patient-centered research to advancements in clinical practice. Join us as we hear from nurses in all facets of oncology care, from bench to bedside and everywhere in between. Welcome to the Oncology Nursing Podcast. Hello, and welcome to the Oncology Nursing Podcast. I'm your host, Stephanie Jardine, Oncology Clinical Specialist at ONS, and today we are joined by ONS member Elaine DeMeyer, founder of Beyond Oncology, a company that creates educational tools and resources for oncology professionals to help change their practice, and member of the Dallas ONS Chapter, to discuss how oncology nurses can become entrepreneurs and how you can foster support for your colleagues who are working to develop niche businesses in the oncology profession. You can also earn free NCPD contact hours after listening to this episode and completing the evaluation we've linked in the episode notes. Thanks for joining me today, Elaine.
Thanks for having me.
So to start us off, can you tell us a little bit about your background in oncology nursing and where it has led you to today?
So I've been an oncology nurse for about 35 years, and I went into oncology when my mother died of cancer when I was in high school. I knew that that was my calling. And from there, I started working as a staff nurse in oncology, focusing in general oncology and transplant, and then went back to grad school very early in my career and trained as a clinical nurse specialist. And it was when I was working as a clinical nurse specialist that I realized the impact that nurses can have on patient care, and that if you put systems in place and operations in place that are long lasting, then you can really see a change in oncology care.
So why did you choose to start your own business?
So I was working at a large academic center here in Dallas, and that was about 20 years ago. And I was given a lot of opportunities in my role as a clinical nurse specialist to create some sustainable program initiatives, like an oncology rehabilitation program, a healing environment plan, and a pain initiative. And the timing was just right in my career after I had been there about a decade that I wanted to look for opportunities for a little more autonomy, independence, and flexibility. And what I noticed is there was a great demand to help recruit nurses into oncology and retain nurses in oncology, much like there still is today. And there was many companies and businesses that were doing physician education. But when I looked at what they were offering, and even if they were offering contact hours for nurses, the content was really physician focused, provider focused. And so I found a gap that there was a huge need, in addition to ONS that focuses on its members, to really look at how can you educate nurses that may not be Oncology Nursing Society members, that may be in more rural areas, particularly in Texas, 2 hours outside the Metroplex. There aren't ONS chapters that nurses belong to. And so what I found is there was a gap and truly a need to focus on the specific needs of oncology nurses. And so that's when I decided that the skills that I had learned as an oncology clinical nurse specialist, as part of the oncology leadership team at those centers where I had worked, gave me great leadership skills that afforded me the opportunity to consider being a small business owner.
That's a great explanation of being able to identify what those gaps are and, what you did to make changes. So, what were the steps in creating your business?
So I will celebrate next year 20 years of being in business for myself. And I thought it wise at the time to start a business with a partner and somebody that was about 10 years my senior, who had been an oncology nurse consultant, had extensive writing and editing and education experience. And so we decided to form the business together, and we worked together for about 4 years. She's on the West Coast, and 20 years ago there wasn't the technology to support a virtual office, and so geography became a barrier for us. So we decided that the best course of action was for me to purchase her shares and become the sole owner. And so when I look at how I started, that was a wise decision for me because I needed that mentorship and that guidance and that support. And I think if nurses want to start their own business, that a good way to do that is to look at the skill sets that they currently have and the relationships that they have built over their career. And then to think about, is this an option for them to do some consulting and to slowly build up their own practice?
So let's talk a little bit about the nurse who is listening to this today and thinking about some of those points that you have mentioned. What advice do you have for those oncology nurses who are interested in starting a business outside of traditional practice to fill a gap that they have identified?
So I think one of my favorite sayings is by Stephen Covey from The Habits of Highly Effective People. And he says, begin with the end in mind. So I think that's what I would encourage nurses to do that are thinking about an entrepreneur role, is to dream of what they want to do and then create a mental picture of that in their mind, and then outline what is the path to get there. So if you know where your end destination needs to be, then you can decide, what is it you need to put in place to make that dream come true? What steps will you do? Will there be certain skill sets you need to work on or connections that you need to make? Are there certifications that would help you achieve your goals? So I think the first step is dream first, then plan.
I'm sure there are those that are listening to us today that are definitely dreaming of all the things that could be done. So you've served as a mentor to other oncology nurse entrepreneurs. What would you say is the importance of mentorship in this non-traditional nursing path?
So I think this path is so unique that it's important to learn from other entrepreneurs. And I say that globally because some of the biggest lessons I've learned is from other small business owners that aren't necessarily nurses. So connecting with people that have some of the goals or maybe have led the path before you is really important. Throughout my career, I've had incredible mentors and role models that shaped me into the nurse I am today. 20 years ago, there weren't nurse entrepreneurs for me to follow. So finding someone that had the skills that I really wanted to refine was important, helping me to learn along the way. Relying on previous skills is a good thing to look at, and whether that's previous skills that you've practiced in a role or through education, and then looking at, are there others that are even doing a consulting role that I consider more of an entrepreneur, either part-time or on a speaker bureau, And those roles, you don't have to be a nurse entrepreneur to have those certain characteristics or skill sets that you need to be an entrepreneur. So I think it's important to find at least one mentor. You may need several. For example, when I first started as a clinical nurse specialist, my manager in professional development gifted me with creative educational skills. Another manager taught me how to track my time and the importance of time management. Had to do these tedious time tracking, accounting for every hour of my day. And although it was painful at the time, it taught me how to evaluate my time and to really maximize my impact. When I first started writing, I had several nurse authors who are now editors that walked alongside me and taught me those skills and graciously gave of their times and talents, coaching me along the way. So I think the importance is to find someone who's willing to invest in you, someone that's willing to spend time with you, and that may have some of the skill sets that you identify that you want to strengthen, refine, or even start.
Those are such good examples of how we need to identify mentors. And I think, as nurses, we're so used to working in, a multidisciplinary team in that traditional setting. And that's a good example of really pulling in other disciplines within nursing to help be mentors, like you're mentioning, for starting a new path. So, what resources do nurse entrepreneurs need to succeed, to eliminate or overcome barriers?
So I think you mentioned it, and what I would say is you need a good team. That in oncology, we're all used to working with a multidisciplinary team and know the contribution and the value of each team member. So I think the same is true for a nurse entrepreneur. So I would encourage nurses to think about, who do you need on your team? I think one of the biggest barriers of entrepreneurs or nurse consultants is they think they have to do everything themselves or know everything themselves. And small business owners, the same, that it's part of their responsibility to just oversee everything. But a good nurse entrepreneur knows what is their strength and then when to seek help. And I think part of our background of being a nurse, where we're used to so many different responsibilities, that it's difficult to let go. So one of the most valuable lessons I learned early on in the business is it's important to surround yourself with people who are willing to help you. So maybe it's a family member who can review your business documents, or a friend who might help with bookkeeping, or maybe it's someone you need to hire expertise when you need it. My most valuable team members are my small business accountant and my small business lawyer. Without them, I would not have the direction that I've needed over the years to be able to start the business and grow a business.
So many good points and ideas that you have from your experience and what has helped you be able to build the business that you have. Do you have any mentees that you are currently working with? And what does that look like to mentor them?
So I think over the years, I've always been a mentor, most currently in the last 10 years of my career. And that means mentoring new speakers, mentoring new writers. So I've formalized that process a bit and put together a formalized speaker mentoring program through the Dallas chapter of the Oncology Nursing Society, where nurses that attended a class setting of how to put together a presentation and presentation skills, and then some of them went on to do some one-on-one coaching. So speaker mentoring is something that I've been doing for years. Writing mentoring is another aspect, another skill set that I've been working to share. And there's a nice publication in Seminars of Oncology Nursing about mentoring the next generation of authors that might be helpful to those that want to improve their writing skills. And then over the last 12 to 18 months, I've decided as part of the downhill slope of my career that I really want to take on nurse entrepreneurs. So I have two nurses in very different roles that reached out to me personally and said, I think I want to be a nurse entrepreneur, and here's my dream. So they already put together like their vision of where they wanted to be in 3 to 5 years. And then we went through the process of developing an individualized plan for each one of them, very different plans. I had them identify what are the skills that they think a nurse entrepreneur needs. And then we made that list together. We usually share a Google document to be able to put everything in writing. And then as they think of things, they can immediately add to those and then kind of prioritize what are the 3 skill sets that they think they need to work on. So one of them, for example, wants to work on her curriculum design skills and how to build a curriculum. Another one is working on her writing skills. And both of them find that it's important to be able to evaluate the effectiveness of their work. So both of them are working on outcome measurements and how do you measure what you do. So different nurses have different needs. And so that's why it's important to find someone that can mentor you on what are your needs.
That's a really good point on trying to identify what current skills we personally have, as well as where we're going and what that dream is and what we need to reach that dream. So how can oncology nurses in traditional practice support their entrepreneur colleagues in developing innovative solutions to cancer care and support?
So I think of 3 things that nurses can do to support nurse entrepreneurs. And the first one is that they can help them identify education or practice gaps. Like, where are the gaps in clinical practice? And what are some of the existing solutions and how are they working? Or do they need refinement so that nurses that have that creative solution, problem solving ability can think about how they might design answers to some of those gaps to close those gaps. The second thing I think they can do is introduce them to key leaders or individuals within their organization that the nurse entrepreneur might be able to build relationships with that can create opportunities or even lead to strategic partnerships. So that networking, those introductions is critical. And sometimes it's, oh, I thought of somebody that I heard that presented at ONS Congress, and she seems to have some of the same interests you do. And I know her, or I introduced myself to her, and I'd like to just do an introduction via email so that the two of you can connect and see if there's some things that you might have in common. And then the third thing I think, and most importantly, is that nurses can send nurse entrepreneurs words of encouragement. They do what they do each day to make a difference in cancer care. And so sometimes it's the text or the email or a card in the mail or even a phone call that lets them know that they are making a difference and that what they are doing, their contribution to nursing is valuable.
You mentioned relationships. How have the professional relationships changed in your current environment? And how are they different from when you were in the hospital setting?
So I think some things are the same. We still both have common goals, and the common goal is to improve patient care. And I think it's just done a little bit differently outside of the hospital or clinical environment. Some nurses say that it's really difficult for them to break that patient connection. So for those that feel like they still need that connection, I encourage them to volunteer, perhaps at a free cancer clinic, maybe offer to help with support groups or with other activities that are patient-centered so they still have that patient connection. I think how things are different is that for nurse entrepreneurs, business opportunities often result from networking. And networking takes work. You have to reach out to people, you have to introduce yourself, you have to have other people introduce you. And with the entire pandemic, that networking has changed because networking usually takes place at conferences or meetings or across a table at a restaurant. So now it's thinking of how can you network differently? So is that on chat groups or through different video call platforms where they actually see you instead of just hearing you? So just think of how can you use technology to still stay networked and to still stay current in oncology. And then if you need that connection to a hospital or a clinical environment, then get some key nurses that are inside those systems that you can feel free to just pick up the phone and say, hey, I'm working on a project and just need your opinions. So I have several of those nurses throughout the United States that I can rely on, that I can send an email or pick up the phone and just say, hey, I wanted your thoughts on how this is working in clinical practice. But we still all have the same goal in mind to improve cancer care.
One thing that I think about with nurse entrepreneurs is what innovators they can be. And as a nurse, I think you are always an innovator because of how you are trying to figure out what we can do to make the patient's care and the outcomes better all the time, even if it's trying to figure out how to tape their IV lines so that, they can get up and move around and, something like that. But I don't know that nurses always consider themselves innovators. So how did becoming an innovator and an entrepreneur affect your practice?
So I think my education and background really influenced my ability to be a nurse entrepreneur. In training as a clinical nurse specialist, we focused on the different roles of a clinical nurse specialist, clinical practice, researcher, consultant, leader, and then focused on how do you validate your worth. And so some of those skills from graduate school and courses that I took in graduate school is where I learned those business skills. And then I think my opportunities as a clinical nurse specialist in working in two different systems allowed me to develop some innovative, long-lasting approaches to improve patient care. And what I found is I enjoyed doing that type of work, using my creativity. And so today I'm still doing that same innovative oncology nursing to develop specific strategies to strengthen oncology nurses through certification, mentorship, or developing tools for health equity or resilience. So I think by empowering nurses, then I feel like I can exponentially improve cancer care. And sometimes that's through innovative and different approaches.
Well, Elaine, it has been just so interesting listening to you and the journey that you've been on and how that has come about and how you have impacted others. And I really appreciate you taking the time to do that with us today. As we're getting to the end of the podcast, there are some quick fire questions that I ask at the end every episode. And so I'd like to ask those to you now. And the first one is, what are common misconceptions about developing a business as an oncology nurse entrepreneur?
So I think one of the more common misconceptions is that people are just born that way. And I think it takes a certain personality type that is more of a risk taker to chart their own path. But I also think that you develop the skills you need to succeed over time. I think that people do think entrepreneurs are big risk takers. For myself, I'm a very high risk taker, but knew that at that point in my life, I needed to take it slow. So I worked part-time as a nurse educator and stayed in oncology, worked at a school of nursing while I slowly built my business, and then transitioned into doing a nurse entrepreneurship full-time. So I think that fluctuates. And I think that some people think, oh, entrepreneurs, it would be great to be your own boss. But I can honestly say you work harder for yourself than any employer that you ever had. And when you have a team, and sometimes that team is relying on you for their income, that puts a lot of stress and pressure and can just change over time. So being a nurse entrepreneur, it fluctuates. And so you have to be able to change as times change and grow or downsize as your business may have ups and downs.
Next, what's something about nurse entrepreneurship that's not often discussed, but you wish people knew more about?
I think the one thing that is not often discussed is that being an entrepreneur can be lonely. Most people don't know what it is you do, sometimes even my own family, or what it's like to start your own business. And if you've ever tried to explain what you do as an oncology nurse at a gathering, imagine trying to explain what you do as an oncology nurse entrepreneur. And when you have that role and responsibility of making decisions, it can be scary and lonely. So I purposely try to schedule at least a weekly lunch, call, or walk with other entrepreneurs and really work hard at networking in order to combat that loneliness.
Thank you. So, what additional training or education do oncology nurses need?
So I think a nurse entrepreneur relies on both their clinical experience, but also their education. A master's degree is not required, but it could be helpful. But many nurse entrepreneurs are not advanced practice nurses or prepared at the master's level. Some nurses do a dual MSN and MBA, depending on their goals. But I think the important thing is to know the market, know your competition, know certain regulations, fine-tune your communication and problem-solving skills. And if you decide to start your own business, be sure to research different business structure options. For example, do you want to be an LLC or a corporation, and what would that look like?
And finally, what are some additional resources for nurses who want to learn more about entrepreneurship?
So I think now there are nurse entrepreneurs that have led the way over the last 2 to 3 decades. So the barriers to being a nurse entrepreneur or starting a business are much lower because of the wealth of information and people that have followed that path in advance. But unfortunately, there's not a good handbook or textbook or even online resources about becoming a nurse entrepreneur. So I think the most important thing is, again, to find that nurse or group of nurses who will mentor you, who will be your resource, who will be able to answer questions and help you learn to network.
Well, Elaine, again, I just want to thank you for being with us today and for your expertise in this area. And I think probably right now there are a lot of nurses who are very interested in everything that you have to say. So I thank you for that. Do you have any final comments for us today?
I think I'm truly blessed to be given the opportunity and support to follow my dreams. It takes a lot of hard work, but for me, I would not change or redo my career path. And honestly, many days I wake up and just have the opportunity to have a different day, an exciting day, and to improve the care of patients with cancer. I'm thankful for that.
Well, thank you again for being with us today. Thank you for listening to the Oncology Nursing Podcast. Tell us about your favorite part of this episode by leaving a review on iTunes or wherever you downloaded your podcast. For more resources and information about oncology nursing, visit us at ons.org or voice.ons.org. The ideas and opinions shared in this episode represent those of the guests and not necessarily ONS.